All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Friday. Welcome to Friday afternoon. Welcome to hopefully for many of you, most of you, the end of your work week. I know some of us work on weekends and all that stuff, but still, it's Friday. Happy Friday. The hair is up because today is a very serious subject. That's a lie. But it is a subject I've been thinking about for the last few days because I've been watching a StarCraft tournament. We'll get back to that in a moment. Um, but the thought occurred to me, and Sarah helped me out with this one, kind of formulating my thoughts around this. What is it that comes first for us nerds? What turns us into nerds, or what kind of directs us down that path? Now, the Legendarium is primarily a book club. It's primarily fantasy and sci-fi book club. I could even say primarily a fantasy book club. We do some sci-fi as well. And when I tell people that, I generally give them the caveat, but we do lots of other nerd stuff as well. We talk about movies and TV and video games and whatever else, even if it's primarily a fantasy book club. And so the question on my mind is, what did one thing drive us toward that, or like fantasy books? I mean, did something drive us toward fantasy books, or was it kind of an early love of fantasy books that drove us toward the other things that we love? So I am curious to hear what everybody has to say. Cody's looking forward to the conversation, which is good. The thing is, like, I have my own thoughts, and I'll tell you kind of a sketch of my history with fantasy stuff and what drove me toward it, or pulled me toward it, or whatever. But I want to hear yours as well, and so go ahead and type yours out. I know there's a character limit, but as well as you can here on YouTube or on Facebook, go ahead and type out your path toward nerdery. So happy Friday, Linnea. Happy to have you here as always. Bradster, are you calling me dad? Am I dad? I mean, I know I'm older than all of you. Well, maybe not Todd. Todd McCarver looks like, I don't know, his profile picture. It's on the line. So anyway. I always leave these streams feeling smarter, says Todd. Then I'm doing something wrong, okay? I'm here to entertain you, not to educate you, Todd. No, I'm glad. I'm glad you do. I'm glad you feel that way. I always leave these streams feeling, honestly, kind of energized. I have a very weird personality. And when somebody asks, like, what's your happy place? My happy place is in front of a microphone. Not necessarily a camera, take or leave the camera, but the microphone. This is my happy place. I love talking to you guys. I love interacting with you guys. And so I don't necessarily leave feeling smarter. I usually end up leaving feeling a little dumber, actually, because I'm like, man, I said a lot of bullshit. Or, sorry. But that being said, I leave feeling energized because this is what I love to do. I love to chat with you guys. So I hope you guys enjoy it too. Let's see. Plixiplox. That's how I'm choosing to pronounce it. I hope I'm right. I think it's a catalyst. The desire was there and the fantasy material started the reaction. Oh, interesting. So is what you're saying is that that it's an innate human desire to tell or to hear or read or whatever, experience fantasy stories. That's an innate human thing, but it has to be catalyzed at the right time in the right way, something like that. Oh boy, Bradster. Oh, my boy. Bradster says the Legend of Zelda and Lord of the Rings movies. Yeah, that sounds very familiar for me. You guys have heard, at least if you're a longtime listener of the podcast, viewer of the YouTube channel, you've heard my journey into the Lord of the Rings through the movies. But yeah, Legend of Zelda has a very, very big part to play for me as well. Let's see. Oh, I'm the father of the legendary. Kind of. Does that make Ryan the mom? Let's choose to make that mean that Ryan is the mom. Um, I'm totally telling him that, by the way. Okay. Oh, Linnea says she's older than me. Okay, well, that's true. That's true. All right. Cody says, I got hooked on fantasy in elementary school in the 90s. The Chronicles of Prydain reeled me in and ended up being the gateway for my son, Elliot, the Silmarillion kid. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember that. Man, that was so much fun to... So, for those of you who don't know, on Discord, we do a lot of fun stuff on Discord. A lot of times it's just, just chatting about stuff. Big group of people chatting and having fun. But every once in a while, we have like a consistent theme going through. And Elliot was a fun one when we were doing our Silmarillion read through last year. Elliot was reading along as well, and so we would get Elliot's comments through Cody in the Discord server, and it was just such a delight to watch, kind of third hand watch Elliot read the Silmarillion. I hope he had a good time with it. I think he did. All right, let's see. That's an old photo. Oh, are you talking about the thumbnail photo? That's true. It is an old photo. I cannot tell you how lazy I feel when it comes time to start doing thumbnail photos. Because usually what I'll do is I'll do them in batches. And to the best of my ability, I'll do them with themes. But maybe it'll be like, me holding a copy of Lord of the Rings, or on the other channel that I was on for a long time, it was streaming services, right? So I'd hold up this remote, or I'd hold up that remote and do like different faces with those. And so I'd spend a half hour just having my photo taken. And then I just have a batch of them, right? And now I have a whole bunch, and it's annoying to have to take more. So yes, it is an old photo, and I don't care, and you can't make me. Let's see. Taylor says, I didn't grow up reading fantasy books. I think they made me much more nerdier. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what they do, isn't it? Final Fantasy games were... sorry. Let's see. Hooked on Chronicles of Prydain. That was the gateway. Final Fantasy games were right after that, and then I was all in on the nerdy stuff. Oh, interesting. So Cody says the escapism was what kept me going back for more. It's a fun... I wonder if I can pull up this quote. Sorry, I know it's loud when I type. But I want to see if I can find this one. Oh, yeah, it looks like Goodreads has the quote. Let's see if I can blow it up a little bit so we can see it better. Then I can share my screen. There's a great quote on this. There we go. Fantasy is escapist, and that is its glory. And before we go on with that quote, I just want to mention it's really common to hear people who don't love fantasy the way that we do. It's common to hear them kind of deride fantasy as just escapist. Oh, shouldn't you be dealing with the real world? And we can get back to that critique in a moment. But shouldn't you be dealing with the real world? Why are you just kind of wallowing in escapism or whatever? So back to Tolkien. He says that is its glory. If a soldier, here, let's put me down there. If a soldier is imprisoned by the enemy, don't we consider it his duty to escape? If we value the freedom of mind and soul, if we're partisans of liberty, then it's our plain duty to escape and to take as many people with us as we can. Oh man, what a quote. So good. That was from one of his letters. Anyway, I love this idea. Here, let me put it back up. In fact, I bet I can I make it so big that we don't have to deal with a sandwich on the side? There we go. So, come off it. There we go. I really like this. Yeah, I came across it years and years ago, and yeah, it's nice to have somebody of Tolkien's stature not just dance around that issue, but to direct it head on and say, yes, it is escapist. And that's a good thing. Now, he's coming at it from a very Catholic perspective, right? He's saying, like, life kind of sucks and the world kind of sucks and we're fallen creatures. And, very, again, a very Catholic way of thinking about it, but doesn't have to be. Like, you don't have to take it in a Catholic way. You can take it however you want. And his whole point is, sometimes life sucks, and that's universal. Yeah, if we want to use the word Catholic again, that is universal. Life does sometimes kind of suck, and fantasy is a great way to escape that, and there is nothing wrong with that. So there you go. Ryan is the Karen of the Legendarium. Nice. Let's see. Plixiplox. My father would make us hobbit meals when he could. He'd also throw in some fantasy in real life. There's a fire on the crest of the mountains, and my father said it was orcs coming to get us. That's so good. I should probably do more of that stuff with my kids. They know what a nerd I am, and they get a little bit of that, but I should probably integrate that more into their daily lives as well. Let's see. Oh, as a 2002 kid. Now, does that mean you were born in 2002? Does that mean you're 20 years old? Or 21 if you're a January kid? That's introduced. I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to wrap my head around what it would be like to have been born after the year 2000. Like, it's that I dislike judgment based on age. I'm not saying, like, how dare you be so young or anything like that. It's just I have to, like, kind of reset my mind around, okay, what would it be like if you kind of, like, came into your teenage years in the early 2010s or something like that. That is a very different world in a lot of ways, not every way, but in a lot of ways from what I grew up with. So introduced to fantasy as we know it by Dragonlance, Lord of the Rings, Aragon. Yeah, now we're talking. Yeah, Aragon. We haven't covered Aragon. I know I've talked about it a few times, but we haven't covered Aragon on the show. I kind of want to, if only so I can actually finish the last book. The first book is not very skillfully written. It's extremely derivative, and yet it's a lot of fun. I quite like the first book. I think the second book is better than that, as far as being interesting. The second book is quite good, and then the third book, it's kind of just like, I didn't enjoy it as much. It didn't grab my attention. I don't really care. It just seems kind of meandery, the story. That's a word. And then the fourth book, I've never finished it. I've tried twice, I think. I think I've given it 2 really good goes. And then I'll get halfway through it and just kind of, like, peter out. It's not like I throw the book away in disgust, but I kind of peter out. And I'm like, I don't really care. And now there's this other thing grabbing my attention. So I kind of want to do it for the show just to force me to finish the series. So I do think for a while, I don't think this is as much a problem now because people don't really talk about it as much. But for a while everybody was obsessed with the first book, the second book, and then there was a backlash. This is awful. It's so derivative. It's whatever. People wanted to hurl at it, and I always kind of defended it in a kind of the same way I've always defended Ready Player One, just in that it's a really fun story. It's a fun book to read, and sometimes that's enough. Okay. Oh, your picture is 20 years older than you are. Oh, wow. Okay. Now we're getting into some good stuff. Oh, now we're getting into some philosophy. If we pull up that screen again, that Tolkien quote, "Why deal with the real world when you can escape?" It's this whole. Oh, you guys can't actually see that. Yeah, there we go. This whole quote here from Tolkien is only part of how he thought about fantasy. This is one aspect of it, sure, but if you asked him to go on and talk about, and bring this up, why deal with the real world when you can just escape? I think he would be the first to say, look, this is part of it, and it is nice to escape for a time, but you know, you go back and read On Fairy Stories, or you read his thoughts on Disney or whatever, and it becomes clear that Tolkien's whole idea behind fantasy is that it is something that arms you to come back to the real world. It gives you perspective. It gives you tools that you need to come back to the real world and live a good life. And so why deal with the real world when you can escape, says Todd. Well, you escape so that you then can deal with the real world. How's that? Something like that. Okay. Fantasy can also give you a sense of power. Fantasy, ooh, as imagining yourself as this sort of badass character. Somebody tell. That's my thought on Name of the Wind. Patrick Rothfuss, Name of the Wind is basically a doorstopper power fantasy. It's just, 800 pages of Patrick Rothfuss being like, I want to do magic like this. I want to be this smart. I want to be this clever. I want to be this good at music. I want to be whatever. And so he writes a character who does that. And and don't get me wrong, I love The Name of the Wind. I think it's such a fun book. It's really fun. But when I read it, I definitely do get that sense of power fantasy on Pat Rothfuss's part. There you go. I can speak. Okay. All right. So, as you guys, I think I caught up on the comments, and so I'll share my own story and why I'm thinking about this. Like I said at the very beginning, I've been thinking about this topic a little bit because I've been watching a StarCraft tournament. The international championships are this weekend, so they're going on right now. I'm missing it for you. Favorite video game, with the possible exception of one or two Zelda games, but favorite video game. I love StarCraft. So the StarCraft 2 tournament is going on, and Sarah was like, what is it about this that draws you in? Is it just the gameplay? Is it just the kind of strategy aspect, or is it the storyline? Do you love the aesthetic of the different, the races, the Terran, Protoss, Zerg of StarCraft? What is it that pulled you in? And why are you still obsessed with it? And then, as we were talking about that, it's like, is it that you love this stuff because you love science fiction and fantasy? Or do you love science fiction and fantasy because you got into stuff like this at an early age? So I'll tell you a little bit of my story. When I was a kid, obviously we're all exposed to fantasy, fantasy broadly understood in a lot of ways. If you're a little kid in the early 90s or mid 90s, you remember Barney, right? Barney was a big thing, or lamb chops or something. So you have this big walking, talking purple dinosaur. That's fantasy, right? Again, broadly understood, that's fantasy. But that's not quite what I mean, because there is, when we put a capital F on it, fantasy, there is an aesthetic that we're talking about, I think. And for me, I think The Legend of Zelda was the first thing that kind of immersed me in that aesthetic. Okay. So when I was a kid, I lived in Seattle. My grandparents lived in Boise. And so it's, a 9-hour drive. These days it's more like an 8-hour drive, but it was a 9-hour drive to get to Boise. We'd drive all the way there 2-3 times a year. And then I was at my grandparents' house, and it was kind of boring. They were old. They didn't have a lot to do for, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, or whatever. But they did get a Super Nintendo. Somebody got them a Super Nintendo for Christmas so that they would have something for the grandkids to do. And the only two games we had were Super Mario World and A Link to the Past. And so I would go to my grandparents' house, and I would play A Link to the Past over and over and over again. And then, eventually, I had played the original. We had the original at home. We didn't have a Super Nintendo, though. And so eventually that turned into the Ocarina of Time, and so on and so forth. So Zelda has been present in my life forever, for as far back as I can remember. Anyway, so that's me at like 6 years old, right? Playing A Link to the Past. And then, is that what made it feel natural? when my mom handed me the Sword of Shannara, I don't know. I don't know the answer to this question. What is it that when I got the Sword of Shannara, which you can call a Lord of the Rings ripoff and whatever else, like, I don't care. When I was 9, I didn't care. I didn't know any of that stuff. All I knew was that there were these kind of country bumpkin farm boys, Shay and Flick, and then the wizard Alanon comes and takes them on their quest. Druid, I guess, in that story, takes them on their quest, and they go through this whole thing. And I was absolutely entranced. I loved it from page 1. I was in, super in. Is that because I was primed by Zelda and other stuff? I'm sure there was other stuff in the intervening years as well that had that kind of fantasy flavor, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. Like the castle in the attic, the Indian in the cupboard, stuff like that, like kind of fun medieval flavored fantasy stories, maybe something like that. Anyway, again, I don't necessarily know the answer to this question. What was it that led me there? Okay, so I'm going to come back to it. Okay, Linnea is coming in hot with an opinion here. I think there is a genetic predisposition to nerdery. I would say our innate selves are inevitably influenced by our parents and their choices. Absolutely. I think that's fair. Until it's not. Like, until there are times when the apple does fall far from the tree. But even when the apple falls far from the tree, it still came from the damn tree, right? So we can't discount our upbringing and our parents and all that stuff. Let's see. Which leads to fantasy is the likeliest literary and life path, especially if you consider the incredible commonality in the nerd communities, neurodivergency, overall personality traits. Yeah, it could be. Could be. Are we nerds because we're different? And what does neurodivergent actually even mean? I mean, I know what it means, like, technically, but when you drill down to it, we all have our issues, right? And so we're all different, but some of us seek out or embrace that difference more than others do. And others kind of try to reject that difference and cling more to mainstream culture. Although I guess that phrase is a little outdated, right? Because nerd culture is mainstream culture these days, which is interesting to wrap our minds around as nerds. It was not this way when I was growing up. But man, it's an interesting question. Again, chicken or the egg, Are we nerds because we're different, or are we different because we're nerds? I don't know. Todd says it was The Wizard of Oz. I tried to watch that. I'm sure I did watch that as a little kid. I don't remember. I don't remember ever watching The Wizard of Oz all the way through, front to back. I know I've seen every scene. I've seen everything from the movie, but it was not a big feature of my life. I think maybe I was introduced to it a little too young, and it was too scary. The witch and the monkeys and when you're 4, there's some pretty scary stuff in there. Let's see. Cody says, my dad was not much into fantasy other than Star Wars, but my mom was a big reader, and between her and my 4th grade teacher showed me the boundless joys of books. I just gravitated to fantasy. And I would be interested to do a survey or to find out if somebody has done a survey of children's books and how many of them, not for like toddlers or something, but for young readers, the 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds out there, how much of their stuff is fantasy oriented versus, and I am coming to dislike this word, but realism oriented. I don't like that word. But I would be interested to see a survey to that effect, to find out what the percentage is. Are kids exposed to more fantastical material? Of that fantastic material is, how much of it is, what do we call it? fantastic realism or realist fantasy, whatever, versus kind of that sword and sorcery style or aesthetic. Um, Princesses and dragons and castles and oh my, whatever. I'd be really interested to hear about that. Hmm. But I love that now my kids can be nerdy without as much fear of being ostracized or made to feel that their passions are uncool as I dealt with. Yeah, I think you and I are probably in that same boat. Ryan was always more like 2 feet in, just in the deep end, super nerd all the time. And during my school years, I always uh, was undecided about whether I wanted to try to just be a nerd or whether I wanted to try to be cool, right? Um, cool did not work out, as you might imagine. but I always kind of wanted that, and so I sometimes, in some ways, acted accordingly, and so I never just dove into being a nerd. The only the only exception to that was my trombone. I played the trombone in high school, and I played the crap out of that thing. I played it so much. I played it every chance I could get. I loved that thing. So, but anyway, point being, like I didn't bathe myself in the aesthetic of Star Wars or other fantasy stuff in the same way. Anyway, oh no, but sorry. Back on that. It is nice. There are things to decry about our modern culture, but one of the nice things is that, as a general proposition, whatever your freak flag is, go ahead and fly it, and it's okay. You'll find your group, and that seems to be more acceptable now on a general level than it used to be. Let's see. Now Elliot loves reading, especially fantasy, and is spreading his passion for it with his podcast. Oh, that's so awesome. How old is Elliot now? That's really cool. The podcast. That's really cool. All right. Oh, boy. I don't know how to say that. Okay, bye. Oh, okay, bye. If that's a joke, then I get it. If it's not, I don't get it. I used to love fantasy as a child, but stumbled through the YA genre growing up. I've spent years trying to find what genre I really enjoy, only to grow up and find out it's been fantasy all along. Yeah, it's interesting how the YA, do we call it a genre? Do we call it an age group? Do we call it an aesthetic? I'm not totally sure where to go with that one. The flavor, the YA flavor of fantasy is its own distinct thing. And you can be a young adult and not care for that flavor, right? You can be a young adult and not want to read young adult fantasy. And on the flip side, you can be an adult and love that flavor and really want to keep going with that. That's all fine. But it is interesting if you grow up reading YA that you might not love it, and that might make you think you don't like fantasy. Oh man. And this is why they say, it's not you can have the best book in the world, but if you don't read it at the right time, it's not the best book for you. And so there are those magical moments in your life where there's that confluence of the right work and the right consumer at the right age, with the right lessons being taught or whatever the case may be. There is that you have to have that perfect ingredient, and that can set up your loves for the rest of your life. Was the fantasy genre popular in France when you were there? I don't believe that it was any more or less popular than it was here in the US. But to be fair, I was not. There go the Jets. I was not having a ton of conversations about that because it was religious missionary service. I was doing a lot of trying to talk to French people about Jesus, which was a lot harder than trying to talk to French people about fantasy. I'll tell you that. But I didn't do a lot of talking about fantasy. That being said, they had some of the same things we did, and so if I was trying to teach a lesson or something, it would be very easy for me to pull in the Lord of the Rings, or to pull in, Yoda in the Empire Strikes Back, and use those things as reference points, analogies to talk with somebody from another culture about something in common. And so, yeah, to my recollection, it wasn't any more or less. And it just wasn't my forte. That being said, I did bring home a few French language fantasy books. I still have some here. Obviously, I have the Lord of the Rings. I also have the Sword of Shannara, Ender's Game, a few others. So I did enjoy going and getting some of the French translations of my favorite books, and they were there. They were there at every bookstore. So let's see, Murph. I read Marvel comic books as a kid and loved sci-fi fantasy TV and movies, but didn't read any of those novels until middle school, high school, and not a ton. I really started reading a lot post high school. Yeah, I think that's probably pretty common. Not overwhelmingly common necessarily, but I think a lot of people who learn to love reading do so a little later. But with the comic books, you go back to our conversations with Matt Woolley way back, like circa episode 20 or something like that. And we talked about comic books being good for kids' brains. And I think there's something to be said for whatever it is. It's a comic book, it's a graphic novel, same thing. It's a novel, it's a kid's book, it's whatever. If there are pages between two covers and you have to turn the pages to read a story or to consume a story, if you want to put it that way, that just by itself can be really valuable, because then later on, if you do want to pick up something thicker or more complex or something, you at least have the experience of holding this thing in your hand and turning pages. And so when it comes to comic books, this is not as big a deal these days as it used to be. But when I was a teenager or a younger kid, comic books were like, don't waste your time. It's trash. It's drivel. It's garbage. If I knew then what I know now, I probably would have been a little more eager to pick up comic books, but I didn't. So I don't have the same love for comic books that a lot of people do, probably just because I didn't read them. But whatever gets you to open a book with a cover and turn pages, that's all you can ask for. Let's see. You would be really cool in, sorry, not really. You would be cool in my circles in college, into Lord of the Rings and heavy into prog rock music. I do love a good bit of prog rock. What? Oh shoot. What movie is it? There's I Love You Man, where Rush is the greatest band of all time. Oh, it's Big Daddy with Adam Sandler, where Styx takes center stage. Styx is like the greatest band of all time. And in both of those movies, I'm like, yeah. I do love a good bit of prog rock music. Who doesn't love Led Zeppelin? I mean, come on. Okay. Oh, we haven't even gotten into this. Should have mentioned I played TTRPGs, like D&D as a kid. Yeah, that can be a great entrance point, man. And this gets back to, now I want to see if I can pull it up. Oh, you know what? I need to pull this one up. Oh, that's so funny. I just looked up, I just went to YouTube and typed in the Legendarium, and the next, what do you call it? The predictive search said the legendary Oathbringer. It's like, okay, well, I know what people like to watch on our YouTube channel. That's for sure. What was I gonna look up? Oh, D&D. Oh, that's right. That's right. Let's see if I can find a specific video. This might be too much to ask for me to go back and actually find this one. Oh, there it is. Ha! I found it. Okay, there we go. So yeah, here's the title is Have RPGs. There we go. Have RPGs influenced fantasy as much as Tolkien? This was a really interesting discussion with AP Canavan. And it was me and Drew McCaffrey, and we were kind of talking about, about this, the role of RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons in the formation of what we now understand to be the fantasy genre. And it may be something that Tolkien created, maybe something that Tolkien created, but is it now even more shaped or just as much shaped by RPGs as it was by The Lord of the Rings? By the way, nice sweater, former me. Looking good. Yeah. You can tell my wardrobe is extremely varied and very interesting. Anyway, so yeah, you can go check that one out. Maybe if I'll throw that in the chat if you want to go check out that video. It's what would that be? Number 347. So you can find it in your podcatcher as well. Okay. Let's see. Where was I? I think The Magic Treehouse was one of the first book series that got me into reading. It was followed by Star Wars and then the Lord of the Rings movies. Moved me to more traditional fantasy. Yeah, my son is actually reading The Magic Treehouse right now. He's loving it. He'll tell me these just bizarre, almost nonsensical premises for these books he's reading. I'm like, sure, great. I'm glad you're liking it. He's like, isn't this cool? I'm like, yes, absolutely. Sounds like a lot of fun. Okay, bye. I love that. Let's see. Okay, Linnea says, how I was hooked. My mom read me Narnia, Prydain, and the Madeline L'Engle time series when I was too young to read them myself. It was a huge influence on me. My kids wouldn't let me do that. They did not. Because I tried. Not A Wrinkle in Time. I can't remember what I tried. I might have picked the wrong things. But they did not like it when I read books to them without pictures. They wanted to sit next to me and look at the pictures, and so the stuff we were reading always tended to skew a little bit younger than I wanted to read for them. So I wonder how they would do now, if they would accept that. Maybe it's time to find out. Yeah. And one day, if for any of you illustrators out there, shoot me an email, because I have a children's story that I wrote a few years ago, and I know it needs some work. It's not the story isn't finished yet, but I have a children's book in mind, and would love to have somebody illustrate that. Hello, Baba Trolling. Or it used to be Baba Trolling. Now it's Baba is Trolling. So we're a little more grammatically correct, which is a little less trolly, which I'm not sure I can accept. Yeah. Okay. Oh, they have D&D clubs in elementary schools now. They have those in my niece and nephew were in one in their junior high. And when my brother told me that, I was like, really? That's awesome. We used to have to hide that, kind of like in Stranger Things. It was kind of, you just do it in the science lab. Don't tell anybody about it. You go off and do Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't do that, but that was how it worked back in the day. Let's see. Did you know there's a bookstore called The Legendarium in Salt Lake City? I was there for work a while back and thought y'all had a store. No, we do not have a store. I still haven't stopped by. I need to make a point of it. They popped up over the summer, I want to say. So maybe 8 or 9 months ago. And I follow them on Instagram, but I don't really see them often there. So anyway, I need to stop by. It's not ours, not affiliated. But I hope it's a nice place. Let's see. Playing a D&D, or Do you just mean Dungeons and Dragons? I'm not sure. Finishing Lord of the Rings, started Dune by the age of 11. So too early to tell for me. But it did look up all the demons and devils in the world. Yeah, hey, lore it's a huge thing. So, like, one of the nice things about fantasy books, as opposed to other types of literature, is that with fantasy literature, there are a lot of different angles that you can attack a story from, or that you can love a story from. Maybe is a better way to put it. So maybe you love the plot. Maybe you just like to be with the characters. Maybe you like the setting. Maybe you like the lore. Everybody has a different thing that they gravitate toward the most. And that's one of the really nice things about fantasy, isn't it? That whatever your particular thing is, as long as it's not hyper realism, then there's going to be something to pull you in. So yeah, that's really good. Let's see. We had then the great Satan scare in the 80s and school clubs went away. Yeah, that was a big thing, wasn't it? And now, isn't it funny how it's very different people with very different issues that are doing the same kind of things that nervous moms in the 80s did. Now it's it's different groups with different issues, but doing the exact same thing. So let's see. My son hated reading for so long and wouldn't even let me read to him. Broke my heart. Then he picked up Harry Potter, and that was it. Now he loves reading. And you know what? I love Harry Potter for that. It's that it was not my Harry Potter was not my intro to reading. I was actually, I think, 11 when it came out, so I was like Harry's age as the books went on. But as the years have gone on and I've seen Harry Potter do that for people, I love the hell out of that series for being perfectly adapted to that age, right? She wrote a book that is it's like for 11-year-olds by 11-year-olds almost, right? It's exactly on their level, and it'll just take you right through what it means to grow up as a teenager in a lot of ways. Book 7, I struggle with book 7. I don't care for the way the series finished out. Not to say there's nothing good about it, but I would have made different choices. But taken as a whole, the series is really, really, really good as an intro for kids that age. My son, Soren, picked it up at the age of, let's see, I gave him the whole series like a box set for his 8th birthday. And that was probably just a tad too early for him. I'm sure there are a lot of 8-year-olds who would love it, but it was a tad early for him. But he has since picked it up, I think after he turned 9, and read the first, and he read the whole first book and most of the second, and I'm sure he's going to pick him up again and go crazy for him. So backwards masking, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. Anyway, all right, cool. So let's see, where was I in my story? The Sword of Shannara, the age of 9, finished it, loved it. My mom gave me Sphere when I was 10, and my mom gave me both of those books, so I have my mom to thank, and I'm sure that's a common theme for people who get into this stuff. But my mom gave me Sphere when I was 10. She shouldn't have given me Sphere when I was 10. That's a 13-year-old book at least, just in terms of content. But I loved it. I just really captivated me. So maybe it wasn't too young. Who knows? But let's see, what else? Lord of the Rings. I read The Hobbit when I was 13, and then the movie came out when I was 15, and I had avoided The Lord of the Rings just based on its title, not knowing that it was connected to The Hobbit. I thought The Lord of the Rings was a stupid title. Turns out I was wrong. The movies really turned me onto that. Oh, wow, I'm not alone. That's amazing. Let's see, where did I go after that? After the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and I had done my Star Wars thing. I was breastfed on Star Wars, as I like to say. I I could ace any trivia quiz, by the time I was 9 or 10. And so Star Wars was definitely a part of that, and the novels were as well. But once The Lord of the Rings came out, I kind of stopped trying to read all the stuff out there, and I just dove in. And dove is a word. I don't care what you say. I dived in. No, I dove in. And I did a short podcast episode on this a couple of years ago, probably, about whether it's better to read widely or deeply. Ultimately, I think it doesn't matter. Pick one and it's fine. You're going to get different things out of it, but you'll get something out of either reading widely or deeply. But without understanding what I was doing, I chose when I was about 17 to just dive deep into Middle Earth. And I think that's what cemented it for me. I think without the Lord of the Rings, without Middle Earth broadly understood, things might have, my life would be completely different. I can trace almost everything in my life back to the fact that I got really into the Lord of the Rings. And now, sorry, my thoughts are going off in lots of different directions. So that is probably, like, my story is probably a really great example, one of the best that I know of the right thing for the right person at the right time, all coming together and just kind of exploding like crazy. Changed my whole life. That was... There are moments, for me, I bet this is the same for a lot of you as well, but there are moments in your life, if you're lucky, if you're paying attention, when you can actually feel the ground kind of shifting under your feet psychologically, or as far as your life trajectory. And that was one of those moments when I saw The Lord of the Rings for the first time. When the Fellowship was in theaters and I went and saw it for the first time, it was like, 5 minutes into the movie, I knew that my life was different now. Which sounds super cheesy and overwrought, but I very much mean it. I don't know how else to put it. It was just a life altering experience. So Sphere was your first adult book at 10. That launched me into more Crichton, Stephen King, and gave me the confidence to jump into Lord of the Rings. Very nice. Very nice. Not sure if 12-year-olds should have been reading gore. I don't know what gore is, honestly. Anyway, all right, you guys, I'm going to be interested to hear more about what you have to say on this subject. So keep commenting. We're gonna call it here for today. But it's a question to consider. What is it that drove you toward this or pulled you toward it? Is it just kind of, as Linnea was saying earlier? Where were you saying that, Linnea? Oh, that's right. There's a genetic predisposition to nerdery. Is it literally a genetic predisposition? Is it nature, or is it nurture? Is it because the right person handed you the right book by the right author at the right time in your life? Is it all of the above? Whatever. I'm really interested to hear everybody's thoughts. So go ahead and comment, and let me know what you think about this. So even after we go, this video will pop up so you can comment there. Of course, you can go to Discord. The link's in the description. So you can go to Discord. Let me know what you think about all this. Would love to hear it. Anyway, thanks for everybody for hanging out for a few minutes today while I kind of rambled for almost an hour. Appreciate you being here. Love interacting with you guys. And I will see you all next week.